In this segment, we will be studying about cerebellum. In this particular video, we will be looking into the general features of cerebellum. I have named this segment as cerebellum and 3 because you will see how various general features of cerebellum are associated with number 3 in the video. Cerebellum means little brain in Latin. It is the third and the largest part of the hindbrain. It's related to 3 parts of the brain. That is, anteriorly it is related to pons and the medulla, separated by the cavity of fourth ventricle. And superiorly it is related to posterior part of the cerebrum, separated by the tentorium cerebelli. It is located within the posterior cranial fossa, where it is related to 3 bones. Posterior inferiorly it is related to squamous part of the occipital bone, and on either side the cerebellum flanks the brainstem, where it is related anteriorly to the posterior surface of the petrous temporal bone of either side. It's made up of 3 parts: a midline vermis, and on either side a pair of hemispheres. Surface of the cerebellum is thrown into extensive folding to increase its surface area. So this will result in surface depressions and elevations. Surface depressions are known as fissures and elevations are known as folia. Each folium contains a core of white matter known as lamina. Some of these fissures are deeper fissures, and these deeper fissures will help in separating the vermis into 9 lobules and hemispheres into 8 pairs of wings. Cerebellum has 3 presenting areas, that is 2 surfaces and a ventral aspect. It has relatively a flat superior surface and well-rounded inferior surface. These 2 surfaces are separated by horizontal fissure. And the ventral aspect forms the roof of the fourth ventricle. On the superior surface, the vermis is separated by the hemispheres by means of shallow paramedian sulci, whereas on inferior surface, these paramedian sulci are deeper, and the 2 cerebellar hemispheres on the inferior aspect are separated by a midline depression known as vallecula. Surface of the cerebellum is related to 3 named dural venous sinuses. The flat superior surface, which is covered by tentorium cerebelli, contains straight sinus along its midline. Along the horizontal fissures, we find a pair of transverse sinuses, and within the vallecula we have falx cerebelli, which contains occipital sinus. Now all these sinuses meet in the midline posteriorly at confluence of sinuses or torculus herophilus. Coming to basic internal organization, from outside inwards, cerebellum has 3 parts. The outermost layer is the cortex, made up of grey matter. The inner core is made up of white matter, and it contains intracerebellar nuclei. The core of white matter branches extensively to reach individual lobules and further to reach into lamina of each folium. So this will resemble branching of a tree known as arbor vitae cerebelli. Arbor vitae means actually tree of life, and cerebelli because it is related to cerebellum here. Now coming to the cortex of cerebellum, it again contains 3 layers from outside inwards. These are the outermost molecular layer, middle layer of a single type of cells, that is Purkinje cell layer, and then we have innermost layer known as granular layer. For more details about histology, you can either visit this YouTube video or you can visit the site. Of course, the cerebellum, when you see the weight, it is only about 1/10 the weight of the cerebrum. But when you stretch all its foldings, the surface, when it is unfolded, it has a surface area which is about half that of the cerebrum. But when you look at the number of cells, because the granular cells are very tiny and they are very tightly packed in the granular layer, and therefore the number of the cells in cerebellum far exceeds that of cerebrum, because cerebellum contains more than 50% of the cells in the entire brain. Within the core of the cerebellar white matter, it contains 3 pairs of intracerebellar nuclei. The largest of these nuclei are located laterally, known as dentate nuclei. It is like a folded purse with hilum facing anteromedially. And then the next nucleus is the interpositus nucleus, which is again made up of 2 parts, an anterior emboliform nucleus and a posterior globose nucleus. And the medialmost nuclei are the vestigial nuclei. The surface of the cerebellum shows multiple fissures and folia, as we have said earlier. There are 3 main fissures which we are all supposed to know. So first this is the outline of the vermis and the hemispheres. We have the horizontal fissure which separates the superior surface from inferior surface. Then more posteriorly we have a posterolateral fissure which separates flocculonodular lobe from the rest of the cerebelli, known as corpus cerebelli, or the body of the cerebellum. Then on the superior surface we have one deep fissure known as primary fissure. This is the first one to appear. Now this fissure will separate the corpus cerebelli into an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. So these are the 3 fissures which all of us should know. That is primary fissure, which is the first to appear, horizontal fissure which separates the superior surface from inferior surface, and a posterolateral fissure which separates flocculonodular lobe from the rest of the corpus cerebelli. In addition to it, multiple deeper fissures are there which will separate the vermis into 9 lobules and hemispheres into 8 pairs of wings. So within the anterior lobe, the vermis has 3 parts. From anterior to posteriorly, they are the lingula, central lobule and culmen. And on either side, the hemispheres are separated into 2 wings, ala, which is continuous with the central lobule, and anterior quadrangular lobule continuous with the culmen. The area between primary fissure and horizontal fissure are separated into 2 parts. Along the vermis, it is simple lobule and folium, and in the hemispheres, they are the posterior quadrangular lobule and superior semilunar lobule. Now coming to the inferior surface, that is between the horizontal fissure and posterolateral fissure, the vermis is divided into 3 parts, tuber, pyramis and uvula, and the hemispheres are separated into 3 parts again. Tuber is continuous with inferior semilunar lobule, pyramis is continuous with biventral lobule, and uvula with the tonsil. The 9th part of the vermis was nodule, which was continuous with the flocculus. This has already been discussed, that is the posterolateral fissure separating the flocculonodular lobe. One need not actually memorize these names, but this will help us just to identify which area we are talking about in the next few details. So phylogenetically, cerebellum is divided into 3 parts. The oldest part of the cerebellum, known as archicerebellum, it includes lingula and flocculonodular lobe, marked in red color here. The next one to evolve in the course of evolution was the paleocerebellum, which include the central lobule, culmen, and its 2 adjacent wings in the anterior lobe, and pyramis and uvula in the posterior lobe along the vermis, no adjacent parts in the hemispheres. So these parts which are marked in blue color will be where the next part of the cerebellum to evolve, that is, they belong to paleocerebellum. The rest of the cerebellum will be under the neocerebellum. This is the most recent part of the cerebellum to evolve. Cerebellum is divided into 3 parts based upon afferents, as vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum and pontocerebellum. Vestibulocerebellum is concerned with balance, posture and eye coordination. So again, it includes lingula and flocculonodular lobe. Spinocerebellum is concerned with muscle tone and coordination. That includes the remaining part of the anterior lobe, that is central lobule, culmen and its adjacent parts of the hemispheres. And in the posterior lobe, it includes pyramis and biventral lobule. And pontocerebellum is involved with motor learning, planning and memory. So that includes all the remaining portions which are shown in black color. Coming to the somatotopy, Cerebellum has a double mirrored localization. So again here we are showing the lobules which receive vestibular projections in red color, the lobules which are receiving somatosensory projections in blue color, the parts which are receiving visual and acoustic projections from the cerebral cortex in violet color, and the other pontocerebellar projections in the areas labeled with black color. The somatotopic representation is, in case of cerebellum, has in the superior surface we have got leg, arm and face from front to back, which are present in the ala, anterior quadrangular lobule and posterior quadrangular lobule. And in case of inferior surface, it is present in the biventral lobule, where arms are anteriorly located and leg is posteriorly located. So that's why we have double mirrored localization. As you know, at the horizontal fissure, if the cerebellum folds back, so we have one part of the body represented on the superior surface and another part on the inferior surface. The cerebellum is also divided into 3 zones based upon its efferent connections. A medial or the vermal zone, which is along the vermis, and this will project to fastigial nucleus, and it is concerned with balance, trunk and proximal limb coordination. The intermediate or the paravermal zone are shown in blue color here. The neurons which are located in the cortex in this region will project to nucleus interpositus, and they are involved with distal limb coordination. The rest of the lateral hemispheres will project to dentate nucleus, and they are involved with skillful movements. So we divided the cerebellum into 3 parts based upon its evolution, that is archicerebellum, paleocerebellum and neocerebellum. We divided the cerebellum into 3 parts based upon its afferents as vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum and pontocerebellum. And based upon the efferents, the cerebellum is divided into 3 zones, that is medial or the vermal zone, intermediate or paravermal zone and the lateral zone. There are 3 fiber bundles which connect cerebellum to the parts of the brainstem. The lowermost has predominantly afferent fibers and very few efferent fibers. Now this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle, otherwise known as restiform body. It connects medulla with the cerebellum. Then we have a predominantly afferent connection to the cerebellum, which connects pons to the cerebellum, known as middle cerebellar peduncle or brachium pontis. And then we have a third bundle which connects midbrain to the cerebellum, which has got fewer afferent fibers and mostly efferent fibers from the cerebellum, known as superior cerebellar peduncle or brachium conjunctivum. 3 pairs of arteries supply cerebellum. They arise from posterior vertebrobasilar system. The posterior inferior cerebellar artery, branch of the vertebral artery, and the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, which is a branch of basilar artery. These will supply the inferior aspect of cerebellum. And then we have superior cerebellar artery, which are the pre-terminal branches of the basilar artery, which will supply the superior aspect of cerebellum. Cerebellum has 3 basic functions. It's involved with maintaining equilibrium, muscle tone, and coordination of fine movements. And it's known for 3 types of lesions: a midline lesion which will result in truncal ataxia, anterior lobe lesion resulting in gait ataxia, and neocerebellar lesion resulting in incoordination. You now know why this video was labeled as Cerebellum and 3. Hope you enjoyed this video. You can visit this site for other videos on neuroanatomy. Thank you.